This is CityCast Chicago. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and here's what Chicago's talking about. AD, if you could ask the mayor one question, I know you ask him a lot of questions all the time, but in this case, I want you to imagine you are getting the absolute truest answer. I'm talking truth serum to the veins, no bull, no fluff, no PR spin. You get one question, what would it be?
I think some kind of honest assessment of his relationship with the governor.
I've asked the governor that question too before, and he gave me the fluff. You know, I want to see the mayor succeed.
Right.
You know, I'm working with him. We're a partner. We're a team. We're a team. And then like 30 seconds later, it was a little bit of shade. So I hear that. I'd love to just like lay it all cards on the table. What are y'all conversations like?
I want it like a Real Housewives confessional.
Like a confessional. That is the Chicago Tribune's AD Quig. I appreciate you being in the building, my friend.
Happy to be here.
Over to you, Alex. Same question. If you get one truthful answer from the mayor, what are you asking about?
I think I would just broaden out and go kind of basic and say, if you could go back and change one decision, what would it be? And I think that it's often a good one to ask, especially elected leaders, because their tendency is to like never admit fault or be like, I only want to look forward. I don't want to look back. But also if you say, I've never done anything wrong, that kind of makes you sound like a jerk, you know?
Yep.
So
it's like if you don't give an honest weakness, if somebody asks you like, what's something you want to work on in a job interview and you just like highlight strengths.
I care too much.
I work so hard.
If you ask him, that a more nuanced version of like, what's your greatest weakness? Or like, what's your biggest regret? I wonder if his answer would be like, oh, I trusted the wrong people. Or I think that Mayor Lightfoot said something. Yeah, that is something that I think that Mayor Lightfoot said a similar version of that, of like, oh, I entered into good faith with too many people who like didn't want to work with me in the first place. But I wonder if he would be compelled with that in that truth serum scenario to say like, no, I made the wrong choice in this moment.
And just give you a list of people that should be fired.
My enemies are as follows.
I think he's taking care of that himself pretty well.
That is Alex Nitkin with the Illinois Answers Project. Now, the reason I brought that up, because listeners, I would love to get your questions for the mayor, because next week I'm headed over to City Hall to have a nice sit down conversation with Mayor Brandon Johnson. And we got a lot of questions for him, but I bet y'all do too. So if you want me to ask your question to the mayor, then please shoot us a voicemail or a text at 773-780-0246, your name, your neighborhood, your question, and you might end up hearing it in the episode. In today's podcast, we are talking about all things property taxes, so strap in, including continued delays at the treasurer's office, the impact of 40 years of TIF districts, and massive tax breaks for county data centers. And Alex, we are going to start there, right? There has been a lot of talk in the year of 2026 about data centers, both in the city and around the state. You got Illinois lawmakers in some form debating the Power Act, right? A whole set of rules and regulations for data centers. The mayor signed his own executive order a couple of weeks ago, trying to create similar regulatory frameworks in the city. He wants the alders to issue a moratorium while they lock down new guidelines. Now, some of the major concerns people have are water usage, power usage, air and noise pollution, and also, are they paying their fair share in taxes? And Alex, you all have recently done an investigation into data centers in the O'Hare area. And what have y'all learned?
We learned that they are getting really big reductions in taxes that they would otherwise be paying, if not for a couple of different mechanisms that we look at. And that question, the last question that you asked of the many questions that are swirling around data centers, is really where this public fight is starting to coalesce. It's sort of a first step of, here's something that government can most easily control. If we are having trouble, stopping them from being built or putting regulations around power that they're using, can we at least make sure that we're not giving away money to them as a way to try to get them to locate here, which is sort of where the political posture was very recently, including like a couple of like political leaders we talked to and mayors were very taken aback by like, no, 2 years ago, data centers were great. Everyone was celebrating data centers. I don't know where this backlash has come from.
One of Pritzker's earliest moves was to offer these tax incentives because, they've called this the new sort of industrial revolution, right? This is one of the new industries that states are trying to lure in, and these tax breaks that, from my understanding, Chicago is given, that Illinois is given, right? That was one of the big steps. And, I don't think people were all as up in arms, back in, 2019, when those tax breaks were first popping up in Illinois.
Yeah, I mean, it really speaks to just the absolutely explosive growth of this industry and the sort of natural skepticism and backlash that will follow from that of, is this for real? Is this a bubble? What are the effects of this? How big will it grow? What we really looked at, and it's important to sort of distinguish the different levels of tax breaks because there are multiple. You mentioned the governor. A lot of the sort of instant reaction to the story when it came out was like, oh, look at the governor giving all these tax breaks, or the state can give tax breaks to data centers, but not the bears. We're really only focusing on county level reductions in this story. So, we mentioned the sort of state level sales and use tax exemptions are a whole other thing. What we found, to go back and actually answer your question, is through a variety of a couple of different mechanisms, 18 data centers that we looked at in the O'Hare area, which is not all of them, but sort of the bulk of them there, received what amounted to about $100 million in reductions off their taxes, resulting from about $2 billion in reductions off of their taxable value, according to the county.
Got it.
And that redounded to ultimately nearby homeowners, everyone else in those towns, because of, as we know, the sort of like zero-sum nature of property tax assessments, yada, yada, paying more to sort of cover up for that or make up for that.
On average, how much do those tax breaks end up costing individual homeowners?
It depends on the municipality. In Northlake, it was the most dramatic just because that is sort of a relatively small town, only 10,000 people living there. And you have three of these absolutely massive data centers, which are shouldering a really big share of the overall tax base there. And so that was where we found this really eye-popping. It would have been a $2,000 difference on the property tax bill of the average taxpayer. And then Elk Grove Village was sort of a different story because there are a lot of high value data centers, but also the overall town is larger. And a lot of those data centers are in a TIF district, which swallows up a lot of that property tax growth and means that the impact on nearby homeowners of the reductions on the data centers is a little bit less dramatic. But there is an impact anytime someone else's assessment goes down inside a jurisdiction that you also live in, you're going to be paying a little bit more.
Because from my understanding, these breaks are coming via assessment. Is this something that can change year over year?
They can change year over year. There are ways and degrees to which they are baked in for certain chunks of time. Specifically, the incentives, what's called the Class 6B incentive that the county grants lasts for a period of 12 years. And then technically they can sort of be endlessly renewed. And also technically they can be revoked mid-term, but that never really happens. And then as for the assessments and sort of these one-on-one decisions being made by the Board of Review or these different sort of like appeals adjudication bodies, those, again, technically are just for that 1 year that they make the decision for. They tend to, because of the 3-year cycle that the assessor reassesses properties, they tend to more or less lock in for 3 years and then get reassessed at the end of that process. We also saw some settlements with school districts, between data centers and school districts, where they decided to lock in, or they agreed to lock in a certain value for a period of up to 6 years. So we saw that kind of variation.
When we look at a data center, are other commercial properties in that area seeing similar like assessment levels? Or is this specific to data centers being assessed far lower than their potential value compared to other commercial properties?
Well, this is like the big thesis statement of Fritz Quig's entire tenure as Cook County assessor. His big argument has been that commercial properties generally have been underassessed for many, many years. The complication here is that commercial values during COVID, especially like offices in particular, have fallen. Like there's high vacancy rates. A lot of them are selling under duress, sometimes for like less than they sold for many years before. So there's a yin and yang here that has been at work for a long time. And the assessor has taken a particular interest in data centers this past couple cycles because the case law about how they should be treated in terms of what is valued as property and what is not valued as property is not settled because this industry is so new, because there's so much money flowing into it. And I think politically, it's beneficial to the assessor to go after like the boogeyman lately.
We're also in this moment economically where, as you were saying, AD, offices are experiencing this sort of crash in value. And we saw a version of that, obviously a magnified version of that last year when we got the bills that were the result of city assessments where downtown office values crash. We saw a sort of mini version of that with the north suburbs where those office values were going down. And then as a result, all the other homeowners' values go up. It also speaks to why people like Mayor Craig Johnson in Elk Grove Village see data centers in many cases as a godsend. He pointed to one example of there is this long vacant office complex that has just been like an eyesore, unproductive. And then here comes this big data center that is going to build this extremely big, valuable facility that's going to be paying a lot in property taxes. And so that's part of what makes them so attractive is like, this is the new thing that is going to pick up the slack where offices left. And as a result, take some of that burden off of homeowners.
This is a new discussion, I think. This is a new part of the discussion and debate about data centers. And we're not the only jurisdiction having this debate. This is like a nationwide assessment entanglement. There are other assessors. The International Assessing Officers like organization is in the middle of a task force about how these places should be valued. And it's kind of like, how do you value a digital factory? We're used to being able to charge for regular industrial equipment of like a widget factory and saying like that press costs however much. And if you take it out, this thing ceases to be a factory. This is very different. This is like, the digital side of this is new and untested, and I'm going to be interested to see if lawmakers at the state level take up interest in saying this property should be treated this way.
At the county level, this is also a really interesting moment to be looking at this because we're seeing officials in the tax offices led by President Tony Preckwinkle's office sort of reconsider whether tax incentives are being given away too liberally or without enough thought. This is something that they brought up in a recent report and that we mentioned in the story, that tax incentives have basically become this sort of perfunctory rubber stamp process. Someone applies for it, they check the right boxes, here you go, we'll see you in 12 years. And this really is part of a new mindset that I think some leaders are understandably starting to look at of like, should we actually start to more rigorously look at these applications and consider whether it is worth it for us to offer these incentives?
And how much can we scale this back without losing industrial tenants to Lake or DuPage or Indiana?
Do any of these pieces of legislation, whether it's the Power Act, the mayor's executive order, the moratorium, do any of these have any focus on property tax incentives or tax incentives? Or is this really, as you said earlier, Eddie, about like their impact on the community, neighborhood, and the process of them being brought in?
I think it's more the latter in terms of like how they're thinking about regulating this, because they're weighing the trade-offs, just like you said. So someone who supports data centers, especially, is trade unions, organized labor that gets these construction gigs that can last for upwards of 5 years. After that, the staffing you really have there is very, very minimal. So the long-term community benefit for regular people is so-so. I think the reason mayors and managers like these is because of the other taxes that come in, utility taxes, sales taxes, water rate charges. But I think there will be more focus on what are the ways this is hurting and benefiting the community, and what are the ways that we can balance that out. I'll be very interested. I think the governor's focus is on power, especially. The mayor's focus, I think, in part, is environmental. What's the long-term impacts? The mayors we spoke to, as far as like other reasons to like data centers, is like there's not a ton of traffic coming in and out. They're secure. They're not dirty. They have a bunch of money that they're like sprinkling around the community in other ways. I'll be interested to see if data centers play a big role in how they are reevaluating incentives, which need to be restructured by the end of 2027, I believe. Like the current incentive ordinance basically expires at the end of 2027. So how they talk about how do we weigh the trade-off and community benefit of these is going to be, I think, a very big thing going forward.
And to be fair, even with these reductions in incentives that we're looking at, again, an example of one of this digital realty facility in Northlake, it got all these tens of millions of dollars in breaks. And the Northlake mayor kind of pointed us to the fact that, yeah, that property 10 years ago was paying 1/3 as much in it was paying $60 million in property taxes. Last year, it paid $200 million in property taxes. That is real benefit to the village if they are adding all of that to both fund local services and take that burden off the plate of surrounding homeowners. That's sort of where they see the real value in it. And then just the question is it more fair to compare however much they're paying to what another use had been paying before or would be paying? Or do we compare that against the even more that they would be paying if they weren't getting these reductions?
We're having this conversation about, in some ways, by the data centers paying more in property taxes, you say the burden is taken off homeowners. But when we look at the picture overall, especially looking at this report coming out of the treasurer's office earlier this week, like the burden is consistently on homeowners, and they're seeing higher property tax rates year in and year out. AD, what was your reaction to this report, especially given property tax bills remain months behind for tons of people across the county?
I didn't know what percentage to expect going in. So the past 3 cycles were like the stunner taxes, where everyone was like the average or the median bill went up 16%, which is like huge money to a lot of people.
Jesus.
I think Alex and I were on here talking about when we talked about the assessments going way up on the south and west sides and how much that impacted folks. So it's not like as big of a shock. The average increase was like 7-ish%, which is still not nothing. And in some jurisdictions, it was like way higher than that. And leading into this report was another report that the treasurer's office put out saying that there's very low participation when voters actually get to decide whether they want to raise their own property taxes via school district referendum, where they ask, hey, we want to bond out for $50 million in new improvements to our school district. A lot of people don't show up to vote. For the property tax owner or property taxpayers that like are in constant communication with me about, here's what happened to my assessment, here's how late my bill is, this homeowner's exemption that I was getting disappeared. What do I do? I'm always thinking about them and worried that this bill will be the bill that like pushes them over the edge. Or this is the bill where they're like, I can't afford to live here anymore.
Yeah, according to this reporting, taxing agencies sent property tax bills totaling $19.9 billion in 2025, almost 4% more than in 2024. I feel like the average Chicagoan I talk to, whether they pay their property taxes or not, like the first place they look is like at the mayor's office. They're just like, is the mayor going to raise property taxes or not? But we know there are a few other bodies that can pull the property tax lever. But Quig, you made a point earlier that this idea that people aren't showing up or voting when they do have some power or some say. How often does that happen? Or how often are property taxes being increased outside of the sort of purview of the average Chicagoan?
I mean, the leaderboard, as far as like what makes up most of one's bill, are schools. And Chicagoans very rarely. I think the most recent example was Bring Chicago Home, have an opportunity to actually like vote at the ballot box for whether taxes go up or down. In the suburbs, pretty often, especially for school districts. The thing that drives me nuts, and I hope lawmakers, if they do anything on property taxes, it's like a small thing that would make a big difference. The way these questions are phrased on a ballot are incomprehensible. We are one of the states that do not have a requirement that like ballot initiatives like this are written in plain English, and the property tax ones are especially confusing. It's a bunch of numbers, it's a bunch of percentages and like micro percentages that don't actually tell you like how much would my bill go up and what exactly is this paying for. And just turnout in municipal elections is lower on average, and most of those votes are happening in municipal elections where folks just aren't turning up and turning out. And if I'm a district, I'm not trying to like rally folks necessarily and make them aware of exactly what's in here. And I think part of this is like also the dissolution of local news. Like, I can't write about everything. I would love to write about everything. I can't cover every suburb. But I think if more people knew this was happening, they'd probably turn up and say how they feel.
This is also an area where TIF comes in as sort of a
That's where I was going next.
workaround for those referenda, because the whole reason why you need a referendum in suburbs or school districts, what you call a non-home rule authority of the city of Chicago, is home rule, so they can just raise property taxes as much as they want, technically. In a non-home rule body, you are limited by state law to only raise property taxes by 5% or inflation, whichever is less. There are exceptions to that. One of those exceptions is, you can do a referendum to raise it beyond that, or you can get surplus money from TIF districts or money from expiring TIF districts. And so this is what we're, I think, about to get into. But when you ask this question of like, hey, why are my taxes going up so much when the mayor says he's not raising levies, when the school districts are limited by state law and how much they can raise, when like the county hasn't raised its property tax in decades, a lot of it is because TIFs allow for this kind of like Rube Goldberg like workaround mechanism.
Because can you remind people, a TIF district freezes the amount of property taxes in a given area, and any money over that gets funneled into the fund that the mayor and city council can then use for other things, not
capital projects.
Capital projects. Yeah.
So, for example, over at the 78, they approved TIF funding for a bunch of infrastructure around the forthcoming Chicago fire. Last year during the budget process, the mayor declared a $500 million TIF surplus.
Billion.
And then
$1 billion. $500 million.
I was talking about the $500,000 that went to CPS. There it is.
Yeah.
The mayor declared a $1 billion TIF surplus, based on state law. Good amount of that went to CPS. There's a lot of finagling there, but can we kind of drill into this more? Because a new study from UIC begs the question, how much have Chicago's TIF funds actually impacted development over the last 40 years? How much have they impacted people's property tax bills?
Yeah, I teach a course to fellow journalists about the impact of TIF, and something I always tell them is TIF exists as like a shadow budget. And because there are so many individual TIF districts, we have 108 in the city of Chicago, which is like...
Is that the most of any place?
Yeah, Mayor Daley loved them. Just loved them. Sprinkled them all over. But because they operate, all of these 108 are collecting their own bills. We rarely, every year, we get a TIF report from the treasurer. But I think we're rarely paying attention to how this little increment gets winnowed away and how big the ultimate pool gets. So property tax revenue captured by TIFs in the past 5 years, $1 billion in 2020, 1.22 in 2021, 1.29 in 2022, 1.36 in 2023, 1.59 in 2024.
Them is budget deficit numbers right there.
Exactly. And the mayor, to his credit, per this UIC report, is starting to wind some of these down. I think there are some who would argue he could wind them down a whole lot more, and kind of open up that value back to every other taxing district.
Because if you don't call the money a surplus, what does that mean?
It sits there and accrues. And the way the city justifies this is by saying, we have projects that we want to do that we need this money set aside for. And for several years, they didn't surplus anything. They said all of this money is dedicated to something and you can't touch it. But in order to rescue many, many Chicago budgets over the past decade, mayors have said, all right, we could start chipping away at some of that and surplus it.
And older people, it's worth it to say, love for the money to just sit there in the districts, because then they can access it. They can say to their constituents, oh, don't worry, there's money sitting in this account for the field house to get rebuilt in the park, the park facility a couple of years down the road.
There's always money in the banana stand.
There's always money in the TIF account. There's always money in the banana stand. But then that speaks to why they get so upset when more and more money gets siphoned out of those accounts for surplus. That then begs the question of, if you're surplusing all this money, it was, for the first time last year, more money was surplused than was actually spent in the districts. One benefit of continuing to do the surpluses is that you can send all of that money to CPS and the other taxing bodies without triggering PTEL, the state law that limits the increases. And so there's sort of a cynical view that I've heard that this is the only reason why the mayor is allowing these big downtown TIF districts to survive rather than winding them down, is that by keeping them and then declaring these giant surpluses, he can keep sending money to CPS and sort of get around that loophole.
The other interesting thing about this report that I'm glad so many people highlighted is the inherent unfairness geographically of the way that TIF operates. So part of the study focused on how much the TIFs in and around downtown generated, and how, because the geographic nature of TIFs, that money has to be spent in that area.
Yep.
So when you have very valuable tracts, they're just going to make more money than they would on the south or west side. And the debate has not always been, well, why can't we get rid of these and have this pot of money available to the entire city? Why should they be stuck downtown?
Well, this is like the central paradox of TIF, right?
Yes.
Which is that the places where TIF is most successful are the places that need that money the least, and vice versa.
Yep.
There were a lot of tidbits in this study that I thought were very interesting. One is how much TIF is subsidizing the salaries of employees at the Department of Planning and Development. One is how much banks and other financial institutions have benefited from TIF. The city paid more than $2 billion in fees and interest to administer those districts.
Wasn't that like 12% of all the money?
17%.
Oh, look at me undershooting.
It got into another thing that TIF defenders point to is how that money can be used to benefit other taxing districts. So like money in this TIF can be used to install HVAC at the school down the street, or fix up the field house, like Alex mentioned. This was the first place I saw like a breakdown of exactly how much had been spent on those causes. Part of the problem was the spending tracking in some of these reports was so bad that they could only go back a few years. When Mayor Lightfoot came in and said, we're going to have a TIF investment committee and it's going to say exactly how much money is going here, there, and everywhere. So the lack of transparency is something I've struggled with, and it has improved very much over the past decade, particularly in the last 5 or 6 years. But seeing these like academics who are very well versed in how this works struggle to get the data that they needed and spot a bunch of mistakes because they were able to like look at the big picture was very interesting and gratifying in a nerd way.
One thing that I sometimes ask myself is like, why is Brandon Johnson not celebrating or championing himself more as a sort of reformer of TIF? He is the first mayor since TIF came along who has not presided over the creation of a new TIF district. He has in fact presided over, right? Yeah, the last one was Red Line Extension, and that was under Lightfoot.
Wow.
Right?
And I was going to say, from what I understood, the amount of surplus that he has declared is more than, as you all pointed out, declared in a few years, like some years before him combined. But does the fact that a lot of that money funnel back to CPS, does that embolden his critics to say, look at him funneling money back to the teachers and the schools because he's a plant, CTU industry plant? Like, is that a viable argument? Or do you think the fact that the money is going to public schools, that the money is being declared in this way, that is in itself a victory?
I mean, yes, they are saying that, unironically. But also, I think that just speaks to the kind of like insidious power of TIF to raise people's property taxes without any single person or entity looking responsible for doing so. He is able to say, yeah, I'm taking all of this money that could be, it's earmarked for being spent downtown that doesn't need it, and I'm sending it to your teachers and students. And that's true, that he is doing that. What he isn't saying is, alternatively, I could just expire these districts early, and then all of that money would be going back to you, the taxpayers, and then we would just have to ask taxpayers via a voter referendum for permission to raise more money for the school district, but I don't want to do that.
Got it.
Keep an eye on Illinois Answers Project on illinoisanswers.org, because we're going to have a big project coming out pretty soon on the impact of TIF on property tax bills and trying to sort of make that whole complicated system a little bit clearer.
We are going to drop links to all of this reporting in our show notes. Before we get out of here, every episode of CityCast Chicago ends the exact same way, and that is with some good news. 80, what's your good news for us today?
Gary has power.
Oh my God, it's only been 2 weeks.
It's only been 2 weeks. So that's like the high note is that things are somewhat operating as they should. I think there were still a few hundred people without. Sadly, the chaser of this is NIPSCO, the power provider for Northwest Indiana, Portage, Gary, filed 3 rate increases either on or after August 11th when that big derecho hit. They'll add up to $7.33 per month, which just feels like salt in the wound if you're someone in Gary or Portage who has been suffering without access to your fridge, your washer and dryer, lights at night, air conditioning in the depths of summer. I would be pretty upset about this if I were living in Gary. The other good news, I suppose, is that federal relief is coming. There was like pretty quick approval of federal FEMA relief for Gary this week. Maybe too little, too late, but better than nothing. Those are like my slightly good newses. The other good news is there's going to be an investigation into what happened here and how it can be addressed, but probably cold comfort to all those folks who have been suffering for the last couple of weeks.
100%. Alex, over to you. What is your good news for us today?
My good news, my actual good news, is fall is coming. This is a time of year that I tend to get really excited for. Other people are like, boo-hoo, summer's ending. I'm like, this is great. I'm going to stop, maybe not being sweaty 100% of the time, be a little more comfortable. Pumpkin spice, leaves changing. I love all of it. One of my favorite parts of it, though, is we're getting into crunch time for baseball season. I'm a big baseball fan. Unfortunately, I'm a New York Mets fan, so this year has not been so fun for me. But what is exciting for me as a Chicagoan, an adopted Chicagoan, is that this is the first time in, decades ever that both of Chicago's teams have been good at the same time.
It's kind of nice.
I have, last weekend I went to a Sox game when the Mets were in town. The Sox walked off. So fun fact, I've now gotten to see the Mets lose in 4 different ballparks this year.
Wow.
Which is a record. I watched the Mets lose in New York. I went to Milwaukee for a game, and then of course in both Chicago ballparks. And it was wild, just the difference between, the last year or the year before I went to Sox games, and it was just absolutely dead. People were flying banners, sort of chiding Jerry Reinsdorf, the owner, saying sell the team. And last weekend, just the atmosphere was electric. It was a packed house.
People eating those sushi push pops.
Fun sushi push pops, the s'mores, cocktails, the Comiskey dogs, the elotes, the whole thing there. When they hit a home run, they play Strokin' by Clarence Carter, which is hilarious and weird and perfectly White Sox. And I am just really excited for what promises to be a really fun, electric, exciting playoff season and wrap up with the regular season. If the season ended today, the Cubs and White Sox would both get to the playoffs in pretty high seeded positions. And who knows, we might even have a Chicago World Series. I don't know what you would call that, a red line series, Windy City something.
I'm knocking on wood.
But yeah, pray for, the property damage to not get too bad if it gets to that point. But it could happen, and I'm excited to see it.
I said it last week. I think this is the first time in years, maybe almost a decade, that I have felt that was even a possible pipe dream, like a crosstown classic for the chip. But this year again, and it's all recency bias and me just overexcited. But I don't know. It feels possible, and I'm going to lean into that as much as possible. I've been to a few Sox games, and I feel like it's an underrated experience.
I just got to add, I mean, this is not exactly a hot take. I'm sure a lot of people agree with me on this, but I've been to, I don't know, like a dozen or so ballparks, and Wrigley Field has the best food by far.
Oh, by far.
It elevates the experience.
Stop playing. It's so damn good. It's so damn good. I'm going to finish us out. Another place for you to meet some new Chicago friends this weekend. The Chicago House Music Festival and Dance Summit is going on all weekend long. It kicked off yesterday with some amazing panels at the Cultural Center. It's going down this weekend. There will be events at Millennium Park, the Riverwalk, the Cultural Center, Daily Plaza. It's a little bit of something going on all weekend. And the best part, it's absolutely free. Shout out to DCASE. Admittedly, they are a CityCast Chicago sponsor, but we're a big fan of the events they put on, and we hope that y'all can make time if you got it. I'm going to drop links in the show notes. And as always, I appreciate y'all being here. Please join me in thanking our guest today from the Tribune, AD Quig. Thank you for making time.
Anytime.
And Alex Nitkin, we appreciate you being in the building with us.
I always appreciate being with you here, Jacoby.
Before we get out of here, I want to give a huge thank you to every single person who has made time for CityCast Chicago. Whether you've been here for one episode, 1 year, or you've been on this ride with us for the last 5, I appreciate y'all. I want to give a huge thank you to the people who make this podcast and newsletter possible, including executive producer Simone Alisea, creative producers Michelle Navarro and Emmy Mack. Our audience development manager is Chimo Okoro. Post-production from PJ Shahamed. The music we all love is from Sam Thousand, Mark Greenberg from the Mayfair Workshop, and all the kimonos. And again, my last thank you is for you. If you really love the podcast and newsletter and you want to get more out of it, like ad-free listening, invites to neighbors-only events, then please sign up to become a CityCast Chicago neighbor. Let me keep it real with you. This podcast, this newsletter takes a lot of work, quite a few salaries, and we are very happy to give it to y'all for free Monday through Friday. Honestly, I think it's one of the biggest selling points of this entire enterprise. But as you can imagine, costs a lot of bread to keep this thing going day in and day out. We done already got 5 years under our belt, but if we're gonna get another 5 years, then we need more CityCast Chicago neighbors, more folks signing up for ad-free listening, signing up to, sustain the work that we do. And so again, membership.citycast.fm, and you will get a shout out on the podcast and in the newsletter. I'm gonna be back bright and early on Monday. We'll talk to you then. Peace.